Welcome back to On the Clock, our show about making the moments matter. I'm your host, Elisa Gumbs. Today, we're chatting about prioritizing your mental health at work with licensed psychologist and the award-winning podcaster behind Therapy for Black Girls, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. Dr. Joy, we're so excited to have you here on the Clock. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to chat with you as well.
Black Enterprise has long been a fan of your work, but so have a ton of other people. You've been named a game changer by Glamour Magazine and recognized for your social impact by the iHeart Podcast Award. Plus, your podcast gets 1 million downloads an episode. How did you get into this work? Like, what made you want to become a psychologist and to focus on the mental well-being of Black women?
Ooh, such a loaded question, Elisa. A beautiful question to start with. So I often tell this story that I really feel like my love and curiosity for human behavior began on the porch with my grandmother in Louisiana. So just lots of people watching and like paying attention to what was happening in the community. And then I had the opportunity to actually take a psychology class in high school and immediately fell in love. Like I didn't realize that was actually a thing that you could study. And so once I found out about it as a field of study, that was my major in undergrad. I actually thought that I wanted to be a professor for a long time. And then I had the opportunity to shadow a professor. And I was like, I don't know that this is actually the calling for me. But then I had a chance to shadow an actual therapist and felt like that was much more in line with what I felt like I would be good at doing. And so got my master's degree at Arkansas State in rehab counseling and then my PhD in counseling psychology at the University of Georgia. And I feel like I was really, really fortunate to have a major professor and like a dissertation committee who really fueled my passion for doing work with Black women. My major professor was a Black woman. And so I feel like I was always really encouraged to pursue the kinds of things that were important to me. And so nobody ever told me that I couldn't really focus on Black women. And so I just kind of took it and ran with it.
And the thing that you're so well known for is that you're like at the intersection of pop culture and mental health. I love how on your website, in your timeline, you include that you started your podcast after like watching Black Girls Rock. So, like, how
Yes.
did you develop sort of this signature lane?
Yeah, so I really feel like it is a blending of the things that I am most passionate about and spend the most time thinking about and observing. So I'm a huge fan of like all of the things that people are watching and listening to and reading. And I feel like especially in the, past couple of years, we've gotten some really beautiful examples of like Black women in their entire form. So not just focusing on the struggles, but also the joys in shows like Insecure and lots of different places. And I feel like those have been beautiful examples for how to talk about mental health because we see these characters so fully developed. And I think it makes it a little less stigmatizing. Like if you talk about something happening with Issa and Molly, it feels like it's not as personal as maybe be talking about you and your friends. But I think that there are great ways for you to start some of those conversations about mental health.
That is a perfect segue to my next question, because I was going to say, not that long ago, it was taboo to talk about mental health at all. And then you
Hmm.
add the extra layer of how difficult that is in our community and how difficult a topic it is to broach in the workplace. So, how do we break
Right.
down that stigma around mental health at work?
So I think it really starts with leadership and leadership being very open and honest about their own struggles and journey with mental health. I think if you make it a priority to say on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock, this is my own therapy appointment, I can't be disturbed, then the rest of your team looks at it as, oh, okay, this may be something I can check out, or this is okay to be talked about here. And so I think it really starts from the top down with leadership having open conversations about mental health, making sure that there are a variety of resources for your team to participate in. So lots of workplaces have EAP programs or they bring in incredible speakers to talk about mental health. And I think it's really important for it not to be just a 1 month kind of thing or one workshop kind of thing, but that you're kind of talking about these kinds of things all the time because wherever we go, there we are. And so when you are struggling with your mental health, you can't just like leave it at home and then go to work. Of course, it impacts your workplace as well. And so I think it's really important for leadership in workspaces to be talking about mental health and making sure that they're providing resources for them, for their team to take good care of themselves.
We're going to get more into strategies later, but since you just mentioned that leadership, what if you're at a company where the leadership does not openly talk about it? Like, what can you do as an employee?
Well, I think it is if you feel safe enough to bring those topics up for yourself, I think that that can be helpful. I know lots of workspaces have like ERG groups that put on different kinds of programming. And so if you are a part of some of those groups, being an advocate for those kinds of conversations and those kinds of resources, I think can go a really long way. But I also think just modeling for other people on your team, even if it's not your leadership, if you are modeling taking time off when you feel like you need to, or talking about the things that you learned with your therapist, sharing different kinds of resources, I think that that can actually go a long way as well.
We recently did an episode on burnout, and we were talking about the fact that a lot of people don't even know when they're experiencing burnout or starting to experience it. And I think that this can be similar. What are some of the signs that work is affecting your mental health?
Well, I think it's really important to think about this, Elisa, because when you think about like how many hours of your day you're actually spent engaging in workplace activities, it's quite a lot of time. And so it is normal that like workplace stuff would blend into your personal life sometimes, and that your mental health would also be impacted by workplace stuff. But I think one sign is if you kind of notice yourself like not wanting to go to work as much or not wanting to log in, and not just the normal like everybody has kind of like, oh, I don't want to work today, but if you feel like it is like becoming excessive in some ways, and so you're like logging more absentee days than you typically would, I think that that can be a sign. I also think withdrawing from coworkers and colleagues, maybe even ones that you previously enjoyed spending time with, can also be another sign that something may be going on. I also think if you find yourself just much more irritable, or like not being able to have the filter that we know we sometimes have at work, because there are lots of thoughts we have, but they're not all necessarily appropriate for the workplace. And if you notice that it's harder for you to do some of that filtering, I think that that is also something that you want to pay attention to.
Those are good signs. It's almost like the work version of being like hangry or sleepy. Like when you notice that you're irritable and you have no filter, that's a
Right.
problem.
Yes.
I want to talk about Black women specifically because corporate environments are sometimes hostile environments for us.
Mm.
Can you talk about what some of the additional layers are of being a Black woman at work that can, affect how well we're doing mentally?
Ooh, so many layers to that. And I think one of the things that often comes up when we're talking about Black women in workspaces are the microaggressions that impact us. So all of these things that are kind of happening in the conversations that are happening that actually have nothing to do with your actual performance. And so all of the kind of commentary about hair, which I know a lot of Black women talk about, right? Like the way that we switch up our hair, or people wanting to touch your hair, like all of those kinds of things that have nothing to do with your actual performance. I've also seen lots of conversations and have talked with people who feel that there's a lot of kind of controversy and tension when it comes down to performance evaluation time. So there will often be these comments around like she's very aloof, or we don't feel like we really know her, kind of thing. And I think a lot of that is because many of us show up in workspaces kind of wanting to only be like doing what we need to do to actually get the job done, right? But then there are all these expectations that we like laugh with you in the break room, or talk with you about like what's going on with the kids. And I think some of that is necessary, right? And so I typically encourage people to have like a couple of things that you don't mind talking about in the workplace, so that you feel like, so that the workplace feels like they know you a little bit, but it is also still very boundary. But I think a lot of people are surprised when they get their performance evaluation and there are these comments about aloofness or not a team player, when it doesn't often feel like it's backed up by any concrete information, right? So it is much more vibes, so to speak, right? Like people don't feel like they know you, as opposed to you're not actually producing and performing in your workspace.
Yeah, I feel like we spend so much time managing other people's perceptions of us, like what we're doing with our face, what we're doing with our voice, what we're doing with our hands. Like it's
Mhm.
always sort of being called into question.
Yes.
And it it can really wear you down. So, how can we build resilience to withstand all of that?
So I think most of us know that it's really important to have as many allies and supporters in the workplace as possible. And you know who I'm talking about, like the people that you have the meeting after the meeting with, right? So when you go into somebody's office or you go on your lunch break and talk about all the microaggressions that happen in the big team meeting, those kinds of people are very, very critical because it does help you not to internalize whatever is happening, right? So somebody can laugh with you and say, oh, so and so was up to their old tricks again, right? So it helps you to realize that it's not anything that you're doing. It is actually a symptom of the workplace. So I think having allies and supporters in the workplace is really important. But I also think it's really important to make sure that you are cultivating a very full life outside of the workplace. So you don't want to get off work and then go to happy hour and spend 2 hours talking about everything that happened at work. Like you want to make sure that there's a clear line of demarcation so that you're spending time engaging in conversations that have nothing to do with the workplace or activities that keep you fueled in lots of ways that have nothing to do with work.
And hobbies, like that was one of your recent
Yes.
posts on social media, is that like you have to have these things that engage you that have nothing to do with making money.
Yes, exactly. And I think it is hard because again, we spend so many hours in the workplace or connected to work stuff. And so it often feels like you don't have that much time after work is over to do these other things. But it is really, really important so that you don't get sucked into some of these workplace dynamics that can then take over your life.
Yeah. When we speak about thriving against adversity, specifically at work, I think we have to address this moment in time that we're in where diversity and inclusion are under attack. And the women that I speak to, often say that it's like even more stressful, even more exhausting, even more demoralizing than usual, over
Yeah.
these past few years for Black women at work. So, what advice do you have to help us get through these trying times?
Yeah, so I think much of what I've already shared, but I also think, Elisa, that this is not, it's not surprising that we also see so many Black women moving into entrepreneurship right now because I think a lot of people are making the decision that, you know what, this is just not worth it, right? And so I think, we of course have to pay attention to the fact that we live in a capitalist society. And so we do need to have income to like keep the lights on and, have a roof over our heads. But I think when it's possible, a lot of people are looking at moving out of environments that feel very toxic to them, whether that be into a different workspace or into entrepreneurship. So I think that that's one is that kind of keeping your options open is typically a really good idea. And I also think it is always good to kind of be on the lookout for like your next move, right? So I think the days of retiring from the first company that you got your job with out of like college, that typically doesn't happen very much anymore. And so kind of always, being networking and like connecting with people so that there can be options if you do decide that you need to leave a workplace because it becomes too much. But again, like we've talked about, making sure that you have hobbies and other areas of your life that feel very full and that you are not internalizing these messages about anything wrong with you, but actually more a symptom of a broken system.
One of the things that I love about your work is that you look at mental health through the lens of wellness and not just illness. And you remind us that everyone has mental health that we need to tend to. So, if you could think about like some best practices, what would you share as universal self care strategies that all Black women should be thinking about or implementing for themselves?
So the one that I often start with that I think is the most overlooked and underrated is paying attention to our sleep. So I think we go far too long without actually paying attention to sleep and like making sure that we have good sleep hygiene. So focusing on getting those 6 to 8 hours every night, making sure that you know like what does the temperature in your bedroom need to be for you to get a good night's rest? What do the sheets need to feel like? What do the smells need to smell like? And also making sure that your bed is only a place of rest. So I think a lot of us will get into a habit of like working on our laptops in the bed and watching Netflix and doing all the things. And then your brain gets confused about what is actually supposed to be happening in bed. And so making sure that you protect your bed and your sleeping space as a place of rest, I think is really, really important. I also think physical activity. So making sure that we are moving our bodies. There's tons and tons of research that talk about the connection between movement and like our mental health and our mood. And so going out for a walk, doing some swimming, doing biking, whatever it is that you enjoy doing to just get yourself moving, I think is really important. And then the importance of your support system. So we are not meant to do work and life and any of this alone. And so I think really making sure that you are cultivating spaces and opportunities to connect with people who are important to you, but that you are also spending time pouring into them is really, really important in taking care of ourselves.
Sleep, move, connect.
Yes.
Yes. So important. So those are sort of like best practices for everyone if you're, well to maintain your wellness. If someone is facing a mental health challenge, how do they, even begin to navigate that at work?
So I think letting somebody know what's going on with you can go a very long way, and not necessarily like your supervisor, though if it feels safe to do that, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But just letting somebody know what's going on with you, because I think so often we suffer in silence because we don't want to, let people know that we're hurting or that something's going on. But bringing in your support system, back to our earlier conversation, can be really, really helpful in helping you to connect with resources that could be good in terms of like a therapist, or if you need to talk with a psychiatrist, like just letting somebody know what's going on, I think is important. And then also looking into resources that help you to feel less alone in what you're feeling. So there are often lots of like either in person or virtual support groups or communities that you can join and kind of participate in to realize that you're not the only person who's struggling with whatever you're struggling with. And I think that that is really helpful so that there is not this shame that you are kind of suffering under. And I also think making sure that you are taking time away. So a lot of us have like FMLA time and like opportunities to actually take time away, but we don't want to use it because we feel like there's some badge for like perfect attendance and all of those things. Like use your resources. And so if you have paid time off that you can use to tend to your mental health, definitely do that. If there are EAP options or if you have insurance through your employer and you're able to connect with the therapist, definitely do that so that you can do what you need to do to take care of yourself, not only for your job, but just for your entire life.
I think so often we're afraid of being perceived as like, less than perfect, especially Black women at work, that we would be
Yeah.
afraid to even let somebody know that we were challenged with something. Is that just sort of a fear that we have to get over for our own best interest, or is there like are there any tips that can help us, gather up the courage and let go of the things that are holding us back from telling people that we need help?
Yeah, and I think often I talk about the importance of kind of just putting one foot in front of the other. Like just because something is hard doesn't mean that it's impossible. And so you may be afraid, you may be worried about what this means in terms of your perception, but the greater risk is that you fall apart in some way because you're not actually
Yeah.
taking this seriously and taking care of yourself. And so that's why the support system is so important, because even when it's difficult, if you have people there who can help to hold you up in those difficult times, it's a little less scary. It's a little less fearful. And so I think even when you're afraid, you have to still put one foot in front of the other and do what you need to do.
In addition to therapy for Black girls, there's Therapy for Black Girls University for younger women, which I love. Like, let's start them out right.
Yes.
uh, what advice do you have for recent grads about how they can start developing good wellness habits from the very beginning of their career?
Ooh, I love this so much. I think really refusing to participate in hustle culture is probably the best thing that you can do very early in your career because I know everybody like wants to make a name for themselves and all of these things, but you don't want to burn out like your first year out of college, right? And so there's plenty of time for you to get all of the accolades and to do all of the incredible things. I think it's really, really important to pace yourself and not to forget to play. Like I think as we get older, we just get removed from all of the recess that we had in like grade school and like all those fun opportunities. But as you grow, it's still important to engage in your sense of play. And so taking vacations with your girls and making time for fun, I think is still really, really important and something that should be on your schedule.
We've mentioned allies and support system a couple of times here, which you have now written your first book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But a whole book about it called Sisterhood Heals, the Transformative Power of Healing Community. There is not a single Black woman I know who can make it through work without her crew, her group chat, her work wife.
Yes.
Uh, what lessons can you share from the book about the importance of these connections at work and how we can nurture and cultivate these essential relationships?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like I would not be where I am in my career without my group chat and other people who have kind of opened the door for me. And I think that it is really important for us, especially as Black women, to go into workspaces with that kind of attitude that it is not enough for us to be the only one in the C-suite or in a leadership team, but that we are also creating opportunities for many other people to come behind us. And that means sometimes we have to be the one who says the thing that is not super popular. That means that sometimes we do have to spend extra time mentoring other people. But I think if you think about it as a system, it is the idea that you get what you put out. And so making sure that we are mentoring, that we are taking the opportunity to talk to other sisters about what's going on, and that we are not making the workspace adversarial for other Black women. It really breaks my heart when I hear sisters have these difficult relationships with like older Black women in the workplace because it just doesn't have to be that way, right? And I think we can understand maybe how that happens, especially with older women who maybe have had to fight for their opportunities. And there is this idea that there can only be one of us. But I think if there are enough of us who commit to changing the system, then the system does have to change. And so I think buying into that as a value system is really, really important for Black women.
Yeah, this has been so needed. Thank you so much, Dr. Joy, for sharing the unique ways you're helping us make the most of the time we've been given by making mental health more accessible for Black women.
Thank you so much. It
And
was a pleasure to chat with you.
oh, thank you. It was my pleasure, really. And thank you all for watching On the Clock. We'll see you next time as we continue to talk about working with purpose and living with passion.